Today's show is focused on Tesla earnings for July 2019 and the $400 million loss. We're also going to have our part two of China patent stealing and sort of a further look at that subject. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. Wanted to remind you, we wanted to thank our Patreon subscribers, our supporters, as well as our subscribers. If you're not currently subscribed, we'd encourage you to do so, because we'll be starting our process on Friday of providing new shows to subscribers only, and then our regular subscriber and non-subscriber shows as well. So I wanted to encourage you to note that. This is I also wanted to note, we also always appreciate the hellos that people send us, but we are limited to the end of the show to respond. So we'd appreciate your saying hello, but we will hold off responses until the end. Earnings came out yesterday. As we predicted, there are numerous people asking us, is the stock price going to do extremely well based on earnings? We indicated that there was a 10-15 point up or down possibility, but there wasn't there wasn't really a good reason why it would be a blowout quarter for the company. The first part of our show today, we really want to review kind of what came out from this, what should we expect over the next week or so for the stock price, and then what to expect over the next 3 to 6 months or so, given new information we just learned after earnings. So the first items that popped up is that there was a $400 million loss. I'd have to say that I'm not, a 65-cent loss was expected, which would have been, I guess, about 200 million. So this is double what ended up, the loss being. At present, I really think that the company has some very aggressive targets in mind, and they're trying to dovetail those targets with what customers want to see. So the biggest target, I think, is the fact that we're still in the zone right now where competing entities their cost to build an EV with 300 miles-ish of range is between $80,000 and $90,000, and Tesla is working hard to offer those vehicles at between $35,000 and $45,000. So on one hand, it's terrific that Tesla is doing this, because it definitely expands the number of people who can afford to purchase an EV. The challenge, though, is that when you lurk in that price range where you're always trying to cut prices, I really think it puts pressure on the company to be viable. I particularly think that this is a tough circumstance because there's a huge amount of debt that Tesla has already from the Solar City acquisition and the building of all their production facilities, among other things like expanding the supercharger network. So there are really good reasons why Tesla is spending money, and I just think that the loss is unfortunate. The title that we used today for the amount of loss was no problem. In Jamaica we say no probleman. In, I guess, the Spanish is no problema. The reason why we're saying this is that what's actually happening right now is that there are different tiers of investors. 60% of the stock in the stock market is owned by what's called institutional investors. So we're talking pension funds, large retirement accounts of individuals. And what they're looking for is what's called growth. So if you have a company, that's showing the type of growth that Tesla is showing, even if not profitable, they're not thrilled happy by bidding the price of the stock up, but they are inclined to support organizations with the type of revenue growth that Tesla is experiencing, even if we're not seeing the profitability that we're eager to see. So Yes, the stock price was down $30. I don't see panic there. As we've discussed on numerous occasions, there's kind of a stair-step process about how earnings hit the market. The first thing that happens is once the number is announced, there's there's an interesting problem right now, which is that pardon me, I was distracted there for a sec. One of the things that's going on is that the hedge funds and fast-moving traders sort of get to hit the stock immediately. What then happens is we go into a 3 to 5 day period where the analysts have time to digest the numbers and get a good feel for how things look, more intensely, having a chance to sort of study what's going on and why. And then we tend to see what the response is of those institutional investors. Based on the fact that Tesla sort of exceeded the production numbers, we actually are of the opinion that the stock should get back into the 250 range that it was in, because yes, the loss was larger than expected, but there are a lot of horizon things that really affect demand and productivity. The two that I can think of that are huge, that we didn't see a lot of discussion of, but that are incoming, is that we believe that China production will start in September, which is still, I think, early enough for those numbers to start hitting before the new earnings period. I think end of September is when that all will be done. So the combination of an increased amount of batteries being produced by Panasonic and Tesla buying batteries from domestic Chinese manufacturers, added in the fact that we're going to see those batteries going into the new vehicles being sold in China, and then add in the fact that the China cost inputs are 50% of what the inputs are for U.S. manufacturing. That combination, I think, bodes well for the company, because all of a sudden you have all these cars that are going to be a lot less costly to build, and therefore if Tesla maintains its current pricing that they've discussed, at least in China, we're going to see, I think we're going to see some really nice numbers coming out of that partnership. And then this also highlights why 3 days ago we did a show where we had a discussion focused on the fact that what will likely happen is more Chinese factories would be built, and then shipping would start going around the world, because Tesla, their real goal is to figure out how to keep prices below $50,000. But in order to make a profit there, they have to find a way to lower costs dramatically in order to deliver those cars profitably. And so I just think that discussions about building in other places might occur, but when you need the money in order to achieve profitability and sustainability, I don't think Tesla has any choice but to implement in the fashion we described, which is to at least build one China factory, get it up to 500,000 units a year, and then start, rolling out perhaps more of those in order to make China sort of the de facto sort of main production facility, because the costs are so low. And I'm also intrigued by costs, because one of the numbers that I'm still blown away by. Take a look at the CapEx numbers on Tesla. There was a discussion that they dropped from $2.5 billion of CapEx spent down, I think, $1.5 billion. And one of the numbers that has been thrown around is the fact that for a plant as old as, well, everything needs maintenance, but a plant built in the 60s needs a certain amount of maintenance to maintain its effectiveness. And so one would not be surprised to see that thing sucking up, $400 or $500 million a year in maintenance fees, and then keep adding those numbers based on the number of large facilities, including Gigafactory, I guess, 2. So all this said, when we look at China, one of the numbers that's also interesting is when you have a brand new factory, the amount of maintenance, repair work, etc., is going to be kind of low. So how many different ways can we count how much cheaper it will be to build in China, including the reduction in costs for repair work? So all this said, my point is that they're selling a lot of cars. 90,000 units, is a record for them. I believe they're going to continue to grow that number. Um, you know, I just think it's overall a good story with a lot of sales. And then one thing that we shouldn't forget either is that we just had one of our viewers who's based in Australia, and he pointed out that there are certain areas like that are, I want to call them first world countries, that still haven't gotten their first deliveries of the Model 3. So there's a lot of in-demand places that want the cars, and Tesla's ramping battery and factory to help service all these marketplaces better. So I just think that the future is bright, and as long as investors feel like, in general, the company is growing and successfully delivering products that clients want, I don't see any problem with them being able to raise capital. And in fact, I think that as we see some of these nice cost elements coming in, I think it'll further spur a lot of happiness and growth in stock price and in the company as well. Look forward to any and all of your comments on what your thoughts were on earnings and what it implies. I did wanted to note that every time someone asked me prior to earnings, would you buy the stock ahead of earnings? And I said, no. You want to wait till you see those earnings, and then you can do your buy or sell at that point. The next thing I wanted to sort of jump in is sort of part two of our discussion of how the patent process works, because as you know, Tesla elected to go 75% open patents, and then they actually have a number of things they should have patented that have not been, and all they do is just restrict access to that to a very few people, so that, for all those reasons, namely it slows down competitors and closing the gap between them, etc. What's happening right now is that the CTO just stepped down, but he's going to remain as a senior advisor. Who knows how much time that is. But the other thing that's been happening is some of the key folks who are involved in battery development, etc., have now started working on new factories to deliver batteries for competitors. So we're 1 to 2 years away from starting to see the fruits of their labor. And so as you lose most of your senior management, and many of them are showing up in the offices of competitors, do not be surprised to start hearing of and then eventually seeing, delivered, particularly batteries and battery packs, etc., that are Tesla competitive because of the number of executives that have bounced to these new organizations. The interesting note we wanted to jump into is to do a follow-up of things not covered in our patent discussion in China, number one. A few items that you should be aware of is, we talked briefly about what happened between Apple and Samsung relative to the iPhone. Basically what happened is that Apple worked for 10 years to develop first the iPad and then the iPhone. The iPod was actually in the mix there as well. And as you may recall, there was a huge discussion about, wow, the Apple iPhone is beautiful, look at what it's doing. As you recall, AT&T is the only company that got it for 3 years exclusively. The reason for that was that prior to the iPhone, it was always the carriers that determined the specifications on those phones. So even if other locations or other companies might have had any inkling of doing a phone like the iPhone, the problem they ran into was that they simply didn't have carrier approval to do anything other than a standard phones with touch buttons and a small screen. So as Apple moved over and delivered the iPhone principally through AT&T, it all of a sudden became very obvious this was a revolution and that it would change everything. So Samsung in particular was of the opinion that they couldn't afford to not deliver a competitive product. So I'd have to say that the reality is that Samsung didn't have a product until they were able to copy what was being done by Apple. Now think through the process of what happened. I believe they were sued for $5 billion. The initial payment was for initial judgment was for like 1 or 2 billion. It was appealed. I think the number went down to $1 billion. So the bottom line is that, yes, there was money that was acquired by Apple, but the one problem that I would agree is out there is that Samsung has what's called a $43 billion per year R&D budget. So one of the subtexts of how patents work is when you have a very large patent portfolio, you end up with this interesting position where when you get sued, you take that patent portfolio, you look at the person that's suing you, and then you strategically try to figure out if there's a way that there's something that suing company is violating that's minor within your patents. And then you go into this horse trading process where you say, well, you guys are suing us, we'll sue you. That didn't really work in this case because Apple is an old company and actually had a lot of patents. And so Samsung had to go the straight litigation route and couldn't sort of sneak in through the back door and force a settlement in that process. So I wanted to sort of run through these stair steps because we then port this over to what's going on with Tesla. Yes, Tesla was advanced, but with those patents open, it limited the potential for them to tie themselves up in a whole bunch of litigation. So I think that it was somewhat of a smart move from how much litigation you're going to do. And if you're a young company, you may not have the patent portfolio that's as large as some of your large automobile competitors, and that might land you in court anyway. So this is one of several reasons why I believe that it was a smart move that Tesla chose to have the patents open. What they did indicate, and has occurred, is that they were hoping that by having the patents open, they could then draw more companies into the space. And that way, if one of the big autos try to put them out of business, they would have some control of that process. Now, attacking one company doesn't do the job because of the number of competitors that are lurking, that are in the field. So one would have to say that I think they've achieved their objective by demonstrating, the fact that the vehicles work and the consumers will drive something like this if it's well done. So well done, hats off to Tesla. Hence one of the reasons why we have Tesla Fan Insight is that we really want to see EVs of all type work. And this includes, what's going on with Tesla in this case. So the issue, I guess, that's lurking right now is what's going to happen in the non-patented stuff by Tesla. And the answer, I think, is that you're simply going to have, more of Tesla's former employees bringing those non-patented solutions to competitors to help them close out the full information gap necessary. And the follow-on to this is the fact that one of the arguments that's been made is that we had shared in our sort of patent discussion one that the process that's going on is to try to get to market as fast as possible. You may not get all of your sales, but at least you wedge into the marketplace with a relationship with customers that allows you to sustain yourself even after competitors climb in. So if you watch the iPhone and the iPad, etc., they may not control all the market share they should, given that they invented the space. But they have some patent protection to go with entering the marketplace rapidly and spreading out globally so that they can sort of get the job done. So I think that this is an interesting thing to watch. So for those of you who are very concerned about what's going on with China and whether or not they're going to wipe Tesla out by stealing patents, as you know, the battery technology hasn't gone there, and Elon has said it won't. So we'll see, how that all works out. I think there's a tipping point coming, and we won't see it for another 5 months or so, and that is if Tesla keeps rolling losses and they're able to deliver at the cost numbers that you're talking about in China. Don't be surprised if we don't see a large number of the vehicles that should be produced in the United States migrate to China, even the truck, is a way to capture that cost reduction and turn that into profit for the company. So, you know, it hats off to Tesla for having other options. Hats off to Tesla because there are earthquakes that happen in California. So having production spread out is going to be a good thing because you can have, more locations so that if anything crazy happens in one location, it doesn't spread to everywhere. So, I think it's overall a good situation. So, I wanted to, it sort of closes, the in general material that we wanted to cover. The loss was unfortunate that we saw, but I think we're in a good situation for the company because we're still seeing strong sales growth, particularly with them not having rolled into other areas. There are some folks mentioning, I'll buy more Tesla stock. If you're going to buy the stock, I'd highly recommend that see what the institutions are saying. So the analysts are going to come out with their reports after carefully combing through the numbers. And once we have those analyst reports, about 5 business days after earnings, you'll start to see the stock move. And I think that'll be a guide for what Tesla stock is going to be doing for the next couple of months. And up or down, I think it's worth, sort of riding that curve. But because you have some really smart people that have hired some really smart people that they work with to determine how to manage what's going on. I, wanted to acknowledge Jerry and Donovan, and we got the Sirius bike roll by there. I wanted to acknowledge Jerry and Donovan and Mr. True. I've seen a number of folks roll by, but generally we try to stay focused on the show's topic. That way we can get the show done well. So feel free to fire any questions at this point that you'd like me to answer. The one other comment that I saw come by was the fact that Elon seemed to be reading from text that was prepared. Elon's dodged the bullet and he spent a lot of legal fees to do it. But as you may have noticed, there's a big news that happened, which is that J.B. Stroebel, who was the final member of the founders of Tesla, has left his official position, has entered a supervisory role. And so I thought this was significant because behind the scenes, he's really been the chief operating officer for a long time. And despite issues popping up with Elon, he's sort of the steady hand. And so we're sad to see him go. True, Jerry. Samsung had no phones until Google invented the Android OS. Very good point. So I would, I think Samsung was in the business, but they were small until they got Google. But, who cares? It was an Apple idea that they stole, and they just haven't had to pay for it because they got a lot of good lawyers. Greetings, Victor, from the UK. Yep, Nokia was definitely dominant. Elon is saying battery day is in 2020 in March. Elon says a lot of stuff, but every day is battery day at Tesla because, thanks for the comments, Brent, I've seen them. I'd say every day is battery day at Tesla because they're producing a lot of them in the Gigafactory. We've done several shows on that. So if anything, I think that, by March of next year, the battery production should be close to double what it's been over this year. So I just think, why call it battery day next year? I think it's an everyday phenomenon. I haven't seen any questions that are sort of earth-shattering here. I agree that I agree with the comments that I've seen popping across the screen here. Elon has been a lot mellower now that J.B. Stroebel has stepped down. I really think it's because one of the problems that's going on right now with U.S. business is in the old days, you used to be able to do and say things that are random, and it wasn't a big deal to some extent. Now there's a new rule. If you're random, all the senior leadership has to sign government documents that say, if we screw up, we go to jail. I think Elon has more money to mess around with lawyers on than JB Storyble does. Plus, he's doing other businesses, including a recycling business, etc. But I do think it's a major loss because JB is an interesting guy, Stanford alum, considered the world's leading battery expert despite not having a PhD. And I also think the most important role he played at Tesla is he's like the mom and dad combo. The reality is that there are very few people within Tesla that can say something to Elon and cause him to mellow out. And because of how much respect he has for certain people like JB Storyble, I think he's one of the few people that could sort of grab Elon Musk by the collar and say, don't do this, it's a bad idea. And now that he's gone, I don't see anybody with the total respect and equal amount of knowledge to what's going on and how to manage it that JB Storyble has. And I just think that that's unfortunate because I just think that, great guy, brilliant guy, calming force to the company, and he's not a headline person. There's this whole discussion going on of robo-taxis. We have a friend of this show named Donovan, and he just indicated that Sweden next year is going to be putting robo-taxis on the road near him. So we're going to look forward to watching it happen in other places. I think eventually it will happen, but I don't think it's all ready yet because we've seen the recent issues. And then the other problem is having LiDAR and radar would make sense, but as you push costs up to that extent, I think you end up with some real problems. So that's my take on that. I don't want to drag on if we don't have quality input here, so I just want to thank all of you for joining us. Remember to do 25 leg lifts a day. I did that today. Also want to encourage you to not eat within 2 hours of going to bed, preferably 4 hours. This is Greg for Tesla Fan Insight. We're looking forward to all your comments and questions because it affects our show dramatically. Please support us on Patreon if you can. Tschüss, macht's gut, au revoir, lehitraot, choda hafez. Enough respect, and thank you all for your comments.